Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we help young athletes, parents, and coaches build strong, resilient, and high-performing athletes for sport and life. I'm Trent head strength conditioning coach and founder of Inner Athlete. Each episode, we break down the training, mindset, and habits that actually matter, from strength and speed development to injury prevention, confidence, and long-term athletic growth. Whether you're a parent trying to support your child or an athlete chasing their potential, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode.
The importance of carbohydrates, healthy fats, and fiber for estrogen and progesterone. So obviously for girls, when we spoke about that before in terms of the hormonal imbalances and issues that can come, why is it actually important then?
So fats are actually what we need. They are building blocks for hormones. So it doesn't matter if you're male or female, boys versus girls. We need those healthy fats. So things coming from avocado, nuts and seeds, olive oil, and then some fats coming from other sort of meat-based sources and things like that, fish, oily fish. Carbohydrates is basically our key source of energy. And so generally boys need a few more carbohydrates than girls and a little bit more fat. But fat is really, really important still. But those carbohydrates are the building blocks for brain health and also for restoring the energy for our muscles, especially around training and fueling during training, which I know you've spoken about before on other podcast episodes as well.
Yeah. Like I said, it's the message is so universal. It just has so many effects on many areas. I think that's why sometimes you have to keep hammering the same nail until it's like driven.
And I have seen maybe if mum and dad are following like a keto or a low carb diet, then that can accidentally kind of affect the kids as well, because it's just what the family's eating. And that can hugely affect performance as well, because teens especially need a higher level of carbs.
So let's talk about that then. So if they're requiring a high level of carbs, is it to help them meet the intensity needs?
Yeah, because carbohydrates are one of those things that actually restores what we call glycogen, which is basically our stored form of carbs in the body, and their main source of muscle fuel. So if we're not getting enough carbohydrates, it can be very, very hard to sort of perform. One of the things that I am seeing as a trend at the moment is protein before training for kids. Yeah, I know.
even I don't do that.
No,
yes, I know. I got a lot.
I know. And so especially if maybe mum and dads are sort of on a lower carb diet, and then they might be saying, well, protein's really good for your muscles, so have some protein before training. And they might be having one of those, protein shakes or a protein pudding or something before, or high protein yogurt before training. I don't recommend that, because we actually want carbohydrates before training, and ideally 1 to 2 hours before training, and not a super high fiber or super high fat type of carbohydrate. So even something like a banana or a piece of toast just with a little bit of Vegemite or something like that, something that's sort of quick acting carbs, 1 to 2 hours before training. And then after training is where we want our protein, not before. But then if the parents are doing low carb, then they might not be having things like bread or other, carbohydrate sources in the household.
It's funny you mention that, because there was a study I looked at years ago. It looked at the amount of protein that you had per day. It actually didn't matter how spread out it was throughout the day, as long as you were getting the daily need, the daily requirements. So you could have a bolus amount, like at breakfast or dinner, whenever it was, but it had no effect in terms of the recovery side. It was minimal effect. It was minimal effect, but obviously, from an athlete perspective, because there's other demands, because a study is obviously going to be different to real world context. So obviously, you can't always apply it. But I was just saying it was quite interesting from that perspective. But we know protein actually needs a lot more time to break down, to be better utilized.
And it can cause, I have seen it most often if they are having a lot of protein before a training session, that's where we get lowered performance, because they're really tired, because their body is trying to digest at the same time as they're trying to run or perform, and that's just not what the body is supposed to do. It's supposed to be a fast sort of version of energy, or they're finding that they're getting a lot of gut issues, a bit of bloating, some digestive upset or something during training, because we want some really nice fast digesting carbs beforehand, not protein beforehand. That's going to take a lot longer to digest.
And it's easy on the digestive tract. From that side, it's not going to be sitting there forever. I think this is kind of a key thing in terms of the long-term success, is supporting development and performance without restriction or fear around food. So from my perspective as S&C, your perspective from a nutrition side, how would you go about creating that that environment with reducing that fear around specific foods at specific times where, you hear it from the media, social media, from parents, or my kid, they're picking up habits, right? How do you go about starting breaking that down and then building back up?
I think as a parent, it's probably important to have the conversation about if you're noticing a particular habit that your child is picking up, talking to them about where that came from and why. So just to figure out, who they're listening to and where they're getting that information from. Sometimes it's friends. But I focus as a nutritionist on what we can add rather than what we can take away. So one of the most common things I see is parents saying, don't have that, that's a bad food. Don't have that, that's a bad food. That's too high in sugar, that's too high in this, whatever it might be. And labeling foods as kind of good versus bad. My view of foods is that there is room for all foods in a healthy diet. Ideally, we want 80% whole foods, which is like your meats, your fruits and vegetables, your nuts and seeds, legumes, lentils, all of those things that we call sort of natural whole foods. Then there's still some room for sort of 20% of, I call them soul foods. So foods that are maybe not quite as nourishing for the body, but we just really enjoy them. That might be things like chips or chocolates and other things like that. And obviously when we're trying to focus on performance, we want to be going for more whole foods, certain types of ones at different times. But rather than telling the kids sort of don't have that and labeling it, maybe we focus on this is what this whole food can do and how it's going to nourish your body. So by having, this after training, this whole food protein after training, so whether it be some fish or some meat or some natural protein powders, some ones that with minimal ingredients, and talking to them about how that actually helps to restore muscle mass and make sure that they're feeling good for longer and helps to support their concentration and their mood and really celebrate all of those things that food can do for the body. Yeah.
No, it's good. I think from my perspective, I notice, well, with my swimmers, they might do gym for an hour, they might swim for 2 hours. Yeah. It's okay. All right, what are you doing during your training sessions? So they'll have a small break. What I've actually encouraged them now to do is like, whether it's like, pikelets with honey or some of them will just have like honey on pool deck now and they'll just have a swig in between their sets just to help them to maintain that level of performance. So the perceived, and this is the other part, right, is the perceived exertion. So a lot of people don't realize from an S&C perspective is if they've got a limited availability of fuel but they're able to complete the set, they might complete it at a harder or it might feel harder to them. What that means is we're going to have pretty much an impaired recovery towards the next session. And that's going to have a flow-on effect for multiple sessions. But if we had a simple intervention of, if they had in between gym and swim, that, they had a few pieces of a dried mango or something like that, just to get their carb levels back up. It's very easy on the digestive tract as well. And that's going to reduce that perceived effort, which means they're going to have a bit more in the tank. And we don't want to be leaving kids feeling gassed that they can't live their life afterwards as well. I think Charles Poliquin, very famous strength and conditioning coach, he said, your training sessions should be hard enough where you still have 20 minutes left of training in the tank. You shouldn't be pushing yourself to complete exhaustion because it has impairment to potential sessions later on down the track, and it actually will impair your recovery, impair your ability to get into a state that you can recover in order for subsequent sessions moving forward. So it's more longer term of seeing things moving forward from that perspective.
And also I think it's just in terms of food choices, in that moment, what is the easiest available for your source? Because sometimes life happens and maybe we can only access something that's not quite as good but still going to give that the carb source to fuel the next session. That's okay. That's okay too.
Most of the times it's usually Gatorades or Powerades.
Which, long term, we don't want those every single day. We don't necessarily need them for kids every day either. But if that's the only carb source available at that point in time, that's better than nothing. And
I think it comes down to that preparation side, which we said, supporting that development.
Exactly.
Moving forward, I think another thing I've been saying to a lot of parents is like post-training, chocolate milk, just ram it into them at that point. I think Tennis Australia actually started promoting this. It was in the news quite recently. You might have seen the segment where a lot of tennis players will actually have chocolate milk post-training because it's got the carbs, it's a little bit of fat, but it's got a bit of protein, it's got quite a few minerals. As well to support the recovery side. And it tastes good. It's palatable. Kids aren't going to kick up a stink about chocolate milk.
And if there's any hesitation with chocolate milk, nothing wrong with it. But if there is any hesitation and they want to go for other options, then, having just a glass of milk and then like a banana or something like that, or making a smoothie, there's other options as well. We've got to think about what is the least stressful option that's still going to give that support for both the parents and also the teens, depending on what they like.
Yeah, because post-training, post-game, they are in a stressed out state, so just make it easy.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of like professional teams, like, it's crazy what they're getting now. Like, I know Melbourne Storm is sponsored by Grilled, so they'll get like burgers, like chicken burgers and sweet potato fries. Post-game, I've seen the French rugby team, they've got like a smorgasbord. Oh, no, sorry, New Zealand, the All Blacks.
Yeah.
They've got like chicken tenders, they've got sushi, they've got sliders as well.
Yeah.
And so I think it's happening at really the professional level, like in fruit platters as well. So they're offering a lot of variety of what players can consume, but they've got a sports dietitian on hand.
Yeah, exactly. And also they've got people who are preparing that food for them.
Yeah,
which,
they got cash.
When you've got time poor parents or coaches that are trying to provide something, teams that are trying to provide something, fruit is great. Like I love a banana for pre or post. That's just a carb source though. Then we've got to also post training think about where's your protein coming from. And milk is great. If you can have a meal, that's great. So something with a little bit of meat or a little bit of fish or something along those lines. Some eggs, wonderful. Some high protein Greek yogurt or a smoothie, or like you were saying, some chocolate milk if that's all you can access at the time.
Chocolate milk for the win.
If you're getting value from the Inner Athlete podcast, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps more parents and young athletes find the right guidance and keeps this podcast growing. Back to the show.
Move on to the next one. So we stress, the nervous system, and the teen gut. So I think this is a really poorly understood area for parents.
Yeah.
I see this from an injury side in terms of usually end of term, end of semester, exams, tests, SACs, whatever you want to call them. We tend to see stress is high and it stays consistently higher than normal.
Yeah.
And it's not until the school holidays you see like this big crash where they're just tired, fatigued, and just like it's almost like they're overly cooked.
Yeah.
They're like holding on. And then second week of school holidays, you see a bit of this uptick in terms of energy levels. How does the nutrition side, I guess, when they're totally stressed out, how does that really play forward over a longer period of time? So we spoke about it from a short period of time, but now it's like we're adding the school component.
Yeah, well, I mean, one, it means that it's going to be more stressful to get through school because if they're not getting the nutrients they need or they're not absorbing and digesting the nutrients they need to actually concentrate and make their brain work properly, it's going to be even harder to get through school and they're going to be more stressed out by those SACs and everything like that because they're not able to focus as well as they normally would because we need certain nutrients to produce what we call neurotransmitters. So these are the things that are actually help us with concentration, with mood, with energy, and with sleep.
Memory retention.
So things like serotonin, which you might hear is like the happy hormone, dopamine. So especially when we think about kids with ADHD, that's a really big one. We want to be supporting dopamine, and I'll talk about the nutrients needed for that in a second if you like. But melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. So if we're not getting these sort of foods and nutrients needed to feed these things, or we're not digesting and absorbing our nutrients properly, then we're going to struggle with school. We might struggle to sleep. We might struggle with friendships, and we might be feeling more stressed on top of that natural stress that just comes with exams and school life, especially towards the end of that year. So foods, if you're interested.
Yeah, go down the dopamine side.
Yes.
Yeah, for each one. There'll be...
Yeah, well, essentially, it's the main kind of nutrients needed for all three, the three main ones. So dopamine being our mood and concentration. So protein is sort of one of the biggest ones I see. So not enough protein or not enough protein across the day is one of the main ones I see as being an issue as well. Zinc. So zinc comes from things like pumpkin seeds are one of my favorite sources of zinc. If anyone likes them. Pepitas, they're also called if you're finding them in the supermarkets.
Yeah.
They're one of the richest sources of zinc and they're really easy to sort of throw into a smoothie, blend it up, or have it as like a little school snack.
Chuck in some oysters.
Yeah, or oysters if you like oysters.
Acquired taste.
Meats, just in general, beef and lamb are also quite rich in zinc. And then also B6, which comes from lots of different fruits and vegetables. So again, things like bananas, eggplant is actually a really good source of B6, but not necessarily something that everyone loves. So that's a bit strange. But these are kind of the three main things needed to produce the melatonin, sleep hormone, serotonin, that happy mood hormone, and then dopamine, which is our kind of concentration and reward hormone as well. So if we're not getting those nutrients, we might struggle a little bit more.
Yeah. And then obviously there's going to be longer term consequences if we don't break the cycle moving forward.
Yeah.
So then it'd be more of those syndromes, and then there'll be more, I guess, if it's really chronic, it could potentially be a disease state.
Yeah, we might be looking at kind of developing, chronic anxiety or depression, or just worsening some of those mental health conditions that sometimes we can be predisposed to genetically, but then there has to be something that's going to be exacerbating that long term as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
No bueno. And then how does that affect the gut?
Yeah.
So in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of, I guess, more research and more understanding of like the gut-brain axis.
Yes. Yeah.
So obviously, how our gut is functioning and performing can actually affect how our brain will actually perform, and vice versa.
Yes. So this is something that I nerd out about a lot. I love talking about it all the time. Basically, our gut is actually communicating with our brain more than our brain is communicating with our gut. So I know we were saying that if you're really stressed out, it can actually reduce gut function and absorption. But if our gut isn't functioning well, it can actually impact how we're thinking and some of those neurotransmitters. So the other thing that helps us produce those feel-good chemicals or hormones like serotonin, dopamine, melatonin is our gut bacteria. And so if our gut bacteria aren't being fed with certain types of nutrients, mainly fiber, then we're potentially also impacting our ability to produce some of these things to support our mental health. So we can end up in this sort of vicious cycle where we've got school stress, and then we've also got, certain nutrients that aren't being met, that's impacting the way we're digesting and absorbing, and then that's impacting our brain, which is making us more stressed, and then our digestive function ends up being a little bit poor. So
just go back one step. So with fiber, what's its actual role? So obviously it's not, we don't count it as because it is a carbohydrate in essence, but we don't actually count it. But what does it actually do for us?
So two functions of fiber. One, it kind of acts like so we call that the insoluble fiber. It acts like a bit of a broom, so it sort of sweeps out our digestive system to make sure that there isn't any bacteria hanging around that shouldn't hang around, so bad bacteria. So it's kind of like the cleaner of the gut. And then the other function of fiber is actually we call it prebiotic. So prebiotics help to feed our good bacteria. So it's basically like fertilizer for our gut bacteria.
Yep.
And so then that gut bacteria can take that food and then it can produce things like serotonin, dopamine, all of these things for us, and also help to support proper digestive function.
Yeah, and then if someone wants to be like, okay, what that sounds like potentially something worthwhile to implement with my son or daughter, then how would you go about it? Because we know that, when you eat foods high in fiber, it can have a positive or negative effect on performance.
Yes. So obviously we wouldn't want to be doing high fiber before training because it's quite slowly, it's not really well digested. So it can actually slow down digestion and make us feel a little bit sluggish. We're not getting those carbohydrates in beforehand, but fiber sort of, in the middle of the day, during school times, or, a couple of hours outside of training, just to make sure it's not impacting the training sessions themselves is really important. Then there's 5 different fiber groups. So I say if we can get these in most days, so that's your fruits, your vegetables, nuts and seeds, legumes, lentils, beans, those sorts of things, and then your whole grains. So things like choosing a whole grain bread or a whole grain pasta or quinoa or buckwheat or something along those lines as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, that answers the other question I had. All right. And obviously we've kind of spoken about nutrition. It's not just about calories in and calories out. It's all about absorption and utilization. Mm-hmm. I guess the question is, why eating enough doesn't always mean the nutrients have been absorbed or used effectively?
Yeah. So again, coming back to if you're stressed, that can potentially reduce that blood flow. So we might be eating enough calories, but we're not digesting and absorbing them because of how our gut is actually responding to them. Sometimes we also have certain issues around maybe some gut issues. So if there's any diarrhea or something along those lines where we're actually got a really fast gut and it's sort of pushing out some of those calories that we're trying to get in before we're actually able to digest and absorb them. There might also be some, gut diseases, so things like inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, colitis. I'm not going to go too much into that, but that's where we see a lot of nausea, a lot of bloating, diarrhea or constipation, or issues around that, which does actually warrant further investigation if anyone's worried about that too, for a proper diagnosis and management. But that's where we see it's not just a case of what you're eating, but it's how you're absorbing as being a big issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this is off topic. How do you think social media has really affected your the way that you actually, I guess, work with parents and the kids? Like, obviously, they're getting a lot of information from
Yeah.
these different platforms and, so-called experts that, have tried something for 6 months and think it's, the Bible at this point. How do you go about that? Where do you, as a whole, where do you like kind of see things moving towards in terms of the social media side, and how it's, social media has affected your ability to do your job?
Yeah.
And then how do you go about working with who's actually in front of you coming into your office?
I have seen social media shift a little bit lately, and I don't know if just my algorithm, because of course I'm a nutritionist, so I get a lot of nutrition stuff.
Yep.
But people are focusing on protein and fiber as being two main things to talk about, which I think is important. Like we were talking about with protein, with hormones and sort of energy, and making sure that it's supporting recovery, fiber for gut health. I think people are starting to move away from the low carb movement too a little bit, which is good, but it's always about individual needs.
That's a wrap for part 1 of this episode on the In Athlete podcast. We've covered some incredible insights today, but there's still so much more to come. Make sure to tune in to part 2 for the rest of the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, give us a like, and share it with your network to help us reach even more listeners like you. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you in part 2.